Hi, and welcome to the Seamless Blend, digital textile dialogues with Gabby and Jørgen. Our primary purpose is to educate and initiate discussions. The opinions expressed are solely our own and do not constitute professional advice or services. We invite contributions from our audience and maintain an open community on Discord.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of the Seamless Blend. This episode is not a departure, but a slight sideways step called Digitising Fashion for Archives and Cultural Heritage. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking a bit about the fellowship I've been working on, which I will explain in a minute. First of all, my name is Gabby Shiner-Hill. I have a digital materials company, Bureau 555. I'm a researcher and academic and textile specialist, and I am here with Jørgen.
Yeah. So I'm Jørgen. I've worked with textiles manufacturing for the last 10 years. And for about half of that time, I worked with technology and fabric digitization and 3D in particular. So that kind of has brought Gabby and I together to talk in particular about 3D and fabric digitization. And as said today, how does this even apply to archives and cultural heritage? So we have this, we've said this almost every single episode now in the season, but I'll say it again. These episodes are a little bit shorter than what we did in the previous session. So we're keeping this to roughly 20 minutes. And today we're going to dive specific into something that Gabby has been very hands-on with, which is exactly digitizing for archives and cultural heritage. So how has that been like, Gabby?
Well, this year, 2024, I think as we come towards the end of 2024, it's really been interesting because I've sort of split my time between fashion, supply chain, digitization of materials, batch processing, large processing of digitization of materials. And also 50% of the time I've been working on my fellowship. So I am a My World and Watershed Fellow at Bath Spa University, and I've been working directly with Fashion Museum Bath, based in Bath, originally the Museum of Costume. They have 100,000 pieces in their collection, which range from garments, so dresses, clothing, undergarments, but it's all the way through to mannequins, yarn cards, Vogue copies. They have got so many different aspects of their collection. But my fellowship was specifically focused on the digitization of fashion assets, and it started back in January of 2024. And the Museum of Bath, they also have a really interesting collection called the Dress of the Year, which was started in 1963. And that Dress of the Year is every year they work with a selector, and that selector chooses the one outfit that they feel captures the zeitgeist or the cultural moment of that year. So I was working with the curator to go through the Dress of the Year collection from 1963 and select 2 or 3 items that we wanted to digitize and work on this digitization project. I was supposed to choose 1 actually, but we ended up choosing 3. So of course, I couldn't choose 1.
Where to choose, yeah.
Yeah, so we chose from 1999, the Alexander McQueen piece from the Fashion Museum Bath, which you can see online on their website. And it's from the very famous collection, Spring Summer number 13. And it's a beautiful lace and leather piece. And that's the piece we did most of our work on. We also chose the J.Lo Versace dress from the year 2000, which was the dress that kickstarted Google Images. I don't know if you're aware of that. The green dress that she wore again when she was 50, but when she first wore it in 2000, everyone started searching up J.Lo green jungle dress, and that prompted Google to start Google Images. Quite interesting.
Oh, interesting.
And then we also chose a piece of kidswear from 1972 from Bieber, and it was a red and white spotted dress that we chose from that. So I ended up working on 3 different pieces. But today, what I'm going to talk about is I did a compare and contrast technique where I decided, rather than settling on one digitization technique for the textiles and pattern creation and 3D garment creation technique, it would be more beneficial to try out 2 or 3 different techniques. And I ended up doing 4 because 2 or 3 wasn't enough. And those ranged from using different pieces of hardware and software, different skill levels, different costs associated with them. All the way through from sort of like high tech, high impact, low tech, high impact. So that's what I was going to talk about today, really, as a bit of a conversation between the two of us, really.
No, exactly. I think we've talked a lot about fabric digitization, different solutions, different hardware, different software. We talked a lot about, like how you can construct digital garments from almost like kind of pattern making and up into Clo 3D or Browseware and all these things. And of course, also this difference between digitizing a full item or an actual garment and digitizing fabrics and garments and all these different techniques that have different pros and cons. So
Totally.
I think very interesting way to understand that more practically today, and how you've done it.
Yeah, I'm just going to dive straight in because we're tight on time and it might take too long, basically. So the first piece of digitization work we did was where we digitized the entire garment as a whole. So that really is thinking creating a digital twin, a 3D twin of the Alexander McQueen piece from 1999, the dress that he created, a digital twin of that, which essentially is a snapshot in time of that dress. We digitized it in June 2024, right? It was this perfect representation of that dress. And for that, we used Artec handheld scanners, the Spider Scan and the Ever scanner. The Ever captures quite large pieces, and it maybe takes about maybe 10-15 minutes to scan the whole garment, and you go around and it looks like an iron and it flashes basically, and it captures it's like a LiDAR scanning technique, and then as you're scanning you actually see the 3D object appearing on their software in front of you, and it sort of tells you, are you in the right capture zone, have you moved away, have you shifted? So you capture all of this information around the garment. You have to go above the garment, you have to go below the garment. It's quite tiring on the arm. Essentially, the scanning process is quite simple, but what is quite difficult is the actual compilation of all of those scans and all of that information that you have to pull together. So we used the Artec handheld scanners. We had some pretty high-powered laptops, which obviously took in that information. And the main outcome of doing this 3D object was that 3D object could be then taken into softwares like Maya, for example, to then be reanimated if it needs to be reanimated, if you want to see that dress move again. So first off, you capture a complete 3D twin of that garment in perfect preservation as it is in June 2024. Then you have the opportunity of taking it into another software called Maya and then start to animate that garment and make it move again for some form of experience, immersive experience, external accessibility from the public that can't visit the museum, a creation of some kind of virtual museum, whatever that might be. It's go for it.
Or I was just very curious about this kind of technology as well, because like I the first time I ever digitized a fashion piece was also using almost like a photogrammetry approach of taking photos and then go moving around. And but then once you bring that in, you kind of have the texture. You have the texture, which is the actual material of the garment, and then you have the model, which is then all these like little polygons or all these little this mesh that's being created. So then with this technique, you're then creating both the texture and the mesh together, right? And then you're creating one object that has the kind of everything is being a little bit like baked onto the onto the mesh.
With the possibility to retexturize in Maya. Now, I worked with Martin Parsons and Harry Davis from CAMRA at Bath University. Now, CAMRA stands for, and I have written this down because I can never quite remember the entire list, the Centre for the Analysis of Motion, Entertainment, Research and Applications. Martin has got a full VFX background. His background is Harry Potter movies and creating the textiles and the capes and animals and all those kind of things. Very, 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 very skilled, very, very specialized. So we worked together really closely on this project. So actually CAMRA also lent us the equipment for this. These scanners are £20,000, right? to £25,000. People are usually scanning engine parts with them. You're not often using them within, a fashion museum setting. So with the skills, we had sort of creative technologists, VFX artists. We also had a fashion consultant working on it, because actually when we digitized the garment, we realized it looked really different. The garment itself looked really different from how it moved on the catwalk. What happened is the garment had there's tulle underneath the garment, and that garment, the tulle had been starched, and the starch had degraded and it had softened. So the actual shape of the garment that was in storage in the museum didn't reflect what it actually looked like when it was on the catwalk as well. So we kind of rediscovered a narrative, I guess, about the Alexander McQueen piece that wasn't there at the beginning, which was quite interesting. And I would say takeaways and challenges, really, it was quite it's quite labor intensive. You have to have some real skill levels of VFX artists and creative technologists. You've got to set up a really, really consistent lighting source for it, which isn't difficult, but it does involve equipment. So you have a really good lighting source with nice diffusers, which white sheets, that's fine. But you do have, it was a half a day of setup to get the space right for it. So it was the most costly and time consuming digitization strand we did, but the outcome of this is it's going to be taken into other softwares to reanimate, to move, and to get this dress living again, almost, because this dress can't ever go on a person again. That can't unfortunately happen, apart from the fact it's tiny, very, very, very small, very, very small. But it also it's it needs to be preserved. It's not going to be put on a human body again, but we can put it onto an avatar again.
How does it work with, for example, fabrics? Because of course, like we talked about digitizing fabrics separately from actually creating or sewing the kind of patterns together, like what you would do with, let's say, clo or browseware and like digitizing fabrics. But then when you digitize the fabrics together with the actual object, then of course, naturally, I'm assuming you don't get any fabric physics or like these things other than the physics that's being captured in like in the exact drape in that moment. But then you're going to have to reanimate and do these things. Are you are visual effects people able to do that accurately and in a way that it looks real?
This is part of the next set of research. So basically, we digitize the textiles with actually Bandicoot's technology. So I digitized the lace and supplied that to Martin, and he could apply that again in the softwares he was using. But the next piece of work that we're looking to do is actually, or the camera is looking to do, is to motion capture the dress. So basically, we're making a sub version of the dress. We will be putting teeny tiny dots all over the dress. They will be putting teeny tiny dots all over the dress to motion capture the dress to get the movement of that textile, because actually simulating cloth in live and real time is very, very challenging, as we know. So that's the next piece of research. That's why it's kind of the most involved, the most costly, the most skilled piece.
Yes, lots of post-processing and
and that's really been done in collaboration with the whole team there, working with Fashion Museum Bath. And I've been doing the research and delving into the garment and bringing in the fashion consultants so we can get the garment as correct to real life as possible. So that was option one. Art tech scanners. Number two was a bit more what people might, listening to the podcast, already understand, was very much where we created the pattern in clo. So from looking at the dress, now remember, we can't deconstruct this dress in any way, shape or form. So from looking at the dress, we created the pattern again. So I worked with Regina, who works with our company, who redrew the pattern in clo. We then digitized the textiles with Bandicoot. So we digitized the lace, we digitized the tulle, and then we brought those materials into clo and we recompiled the dress. We remade it again in clo. We didn't, it's got a leather neck piece, actually, this garment. We didn't do that within clo because we'd need to model that in Blender. But it was the most kind of like straightforward. We're going to make the pattern, we're going to digitize the textiles, we're then going to sew it together and do the adjustments we need whilst looking at the garment on the model. And the beauty of this was that we could sit and look at the model in front of us. So we had the dress mounted on a mannequin and we could look at it in front of us, literally walk around it and recreate it again. And that means we could send it down a catwalk in clo. Whether I'm not sure, we could get the real movement from as really close to the catwalk, the way it was on the garment, because the tulle is so structured and so stiff underneath. So we haven't got to that point yet. But essentially, it's all the softwares we understand, right? It's Bandicoot, it's clo, it's a bit of Adobe. We use DSLR cameras. We had a hot shoe. We had some nice consistent lighting, but it was quite, it was maybe, 2 days work, really. Right, if you think about who was working on these, and that garment now, that that version of the McQueen garment can go into Clo, but it can also be taken into Unreal. It can go into other spaces, or the pattern can be shared with design students for them to design and iterate. And the textiles can be shared for them to design and iterate. So it's a real collaborative piece of work, that one.
Yeah. And then you basically, it's like in difference from the option one, where you have almost like you get the object, or you get the kind of model and mesh and everything in one, and texture on one. And then when post-processing, you have to really kind of work on how to do motion design, all these things. In this second option, you then digitize the textiles and you digitize the patterns, or at least kind of then interpreting. So you actually you get the components of the garment, you could say, almost like you get the actual digital material and a digital pattern. And then when you bring all that together in Clo, or kind of even then create a digital garment, you'll have a lot more like movement, and you can even adjust the physics of the material separately from the actual model, and you'll have that kind of a bit more standard kind of fashion design approach, I guess.
Totally. But the challenges of this is, for example, on the McQueen garment, and when I post this, we'll make sure we put pictures of the McQueen garment up there. When on the McQueen garment, there's this hand applique that's happened, a scalloped edge along the hem. That's really difficult to create. You have to do that literally by hand. Physically, and you also have to do it by hand digitally as well. So that is actually very, very challenging to create in Clo. Not saying it's impossible, but it does add another element of challenge. And so it's much more like a representation of the garment rather than an exact digital replica. So I would say the art tech is giving you a digital replica, whereas this Clo and the Bandicoot solution is giving us a really good representation, which we can then take apart, explode, pull out, things that you could never do with the physical garment, right? Like in the archive.
Very cool.
Then the third option was actually working with the Bieber garment. So that was actually recreating the pattern. And we just took the textile from a photograph. So they've got really good photographs of the garment. So we took the textile and repeated it from a photograph. No PBR maps. Don't shout at me. Nothing fancy, just a flat photograph. And then we recreated that garment in Lens Studio so that the end user could wear the Bieber garment as an augmented reality filter in Snap. So it was much more about user experience, virtual try on. Can we get the material to move? Can we get it to sway? It was quick, maybe 6-7 hour piece of work of creating the garment completely as a filter, and then a bit of back and forth testing of the filter. And then it went out into the wild world, and we used it actually at different digital festivals so people could try on the Bieber dress and move and sway, and it snaps to your body size and all of your height, and if you're sitting down, standing up. So a much more interactive, fun, playful outcome, as opposed to, again, it's a representation of the Bieber dress. It is not a digital twin in no way, shape or form.
And the quality, like almost like as you said, like again, like I think there's a lot of use cases for actually using 2D just is straightforward imagery without actually not even having to go into full PBR and taking all that extra effort to actually get the PBR maps. And a lot of those cases, at least in my experience, we see that happens often with 3D configurators. The 3D configurators are web-based. They can't necessarily load into full quality. It's not actually necessary to have a full PBR. Exactly. Did you feel like that was the same kind of thing that applied to like Snapchat and filters, and that you wouldn't be able to carry the quality forward out into the interactive experience anyways, so you might as well almost go with something of a little bit more like kind of lower quality materials or low fidelity? We went for sort of like low tech but high engagement impact in the sense of this. So we knew we only needed a photograph. We didn't need to redigitize the textiles. We could work with what we had. What we had to focus on was the movement of the filter, and I worked with James Mack on that, and he worked on the filter, and it was more about can we get the filter to sway and move and swish like material does, which is very uncommon in filters. Like they move, they might like drip and drop or flash and sparkle around your head kind of things, but this was about swaying, draping and movement. And it was funny because when people were trying on the filter, they were like twirling around and swishing and swaying because the material actually moved, which was kind of interesting. I cannot tell you that the material moved in the same way that the Bieber garment moved. It's not that. Yeah.
But we're at the beginnings of some of the use cases for this, so that was the point.
But this is almost like maybe from a marketing point of view, and some of these things, like it's almost like these like brand activation type of things, where
exactly.
like brands can do this, and it's not necessarily that it has to look the exact same way or behave the exact same way, scientifically or in an actual way. It's more just like as a way of creating engagement and getting people excited about what you've created digitally. Yeah.
Exactly. Engagement in museum and galleries, get people talking about the new ways of looking at the collection, opening up new conversations, all of this stuff. And then last but not least, we also scanned the McQueen dress, actually, and the Versace dress with Polycam. And I've mentioned Polycam a few times. So I think it sounds like I'm obsessed with it. I'm not. It's just because it's not easy. Basically, so we had a good iPad Pro from camera, and so we loaded Polycam on it when we were doing all the digitising, and we were almost going to use it as a reference point. We weren't necessarily planning on using it, and I wasn't planning on using it as a real digitisation technique. I was thinking more quick reference. I'll do a quick scan. It can be a nice reference. We'll be able to look back on it, turn it in 3D, that kind of thing. But then we did it. We scanned the garment, and it took 5 minutes, 3 minutes maybe to scan the garment, 2 to 3 minutes of processing. And suddenly you just have, an augmented reality digital twin of the garment that stood in front of you. And we were thinking about engagement. We're thinking about access of the collection and how people can start to see these articles if they can't visit the museum, if it's a global audience. And that's really what got me thinking around that space. And I have to say, I'm not a complete pro on any of these softwares, but what I do find engaging is if it's easy for me to teach someone else to do, then suddenly you've got 30 people using it. So I actually ended up replicating this in a workshop, and I got 30 people scanning one garment, and everyone was sort of talking about how much they could zoom in on the garment, how they felt like they could take it away and then study it at a later date. They could suddenly see the back, which they couldn't see before, maybe the inside of the garment, which is really important. So this was using an iPhone 12 or above, or an iPad Pro, any of those smartphones that have got LiDAR scanning capabilities, into Polycam Pro. We did use Polycam Pro, so we could really adjust and work with the assets as much as possible. But you've got the free option as well, which is actually really good as well. And then you can throw that piece, a total 3D fashion piece, into an augmented reality space. Well, you just throw it into AR, and then you can see it in front of you at a later date, or even next to the original one that you were making. And that was, yes, low cost, but sort of like, again, high engagement. And I think the question always is when you're looking at archives and any of this digitisation for heritage collections, what does the end user want and need? They may not know what they want and need, but what do you need to provide them with? Are they a PhD researcher who is looking at the inside of the garments and construction techniques, from the 1960s, for example? Or is it about, engagement with the textiles and how they work? So it's really, how do you need to deliver that information? Because, as I've said, I've gone through 3 different scanning techniques. They all offer different opportunities for different engagement and different outcomes. And I think the real question is, like, what does your audience actually need, and how do they want to see those pieces? And I would always encourage the museums to work with what they've got as a starting point, rather than thinking about the highest technology and the highest output, which might take you a really long time to get to that point.
But that's something we've talked about, I think, throughout almost like all the episodes, and has been quite consistent, is that you have to think about the end before, like, preferably just start by thinking about what you're going to be using it for, more than thinking about, or like having a little bit of this like tech obsession that you need to have the absolute best equipment done, and then you end up actually doing nothing, and because you don't have the money to buy the best and all these things. In a lot of cases, if you have a phone, you can get quite far with that, and then you can try maybe with a phone scan, and then you can move up the ladder and see step by step, and see what's necessary. So those are the kind of like 4 scanning techniques. That many questions have come out of the fellowship, which I'm writing up right now, around standardization, digitization workflows and pipelines. Do you have an agreement with your designers to digitize? What about the IP? There's a lot of questions.
But if you want to know a little bit more, I am talking at South by Southwest, March the 8th, very exciting, about digitising the Versace dress in particular, and a little bit about McQueen. So yeah, that's next year, but I'll be releasing information as and when I write it up and it can be released. So that's thank you for all the questions and being interested in the fellowship.
Yeah, no, I think I like, of course, now we've talked about it and we haven't actually, like, you've shown me some images before, and I'm really excited. I think every time I'm seeing this, and I see some videos behind the scenes, and some of this I know, and some of these things are quite new to me, and I'm familiar with some of the kind of technology, but not the actual specific products. And so, yeah, I'm excited also to, in particular, about your South by Southwest presentation. So 2025 is going to be a good year.
Yes.
But thanks to anyone that tuned in to listen, and we'll be back again next week. So yeah, see you next week.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Seamless Blend. If you enjoyed today's discussion, feel free to subscribe. We also invite you to connect with us and participate in our discussions on Discord. Let us know if you agree, disagree, or have any questions. Until next time, take care.